Hi, I'm Steve Adubato. All right, you ready? Everything you ever wanted or needed to know about Abraham Lincoln. People think they know him, right? As one of the greatest presidents ever, but this gentleman really knows him. He is Dr. Lou Major, who is a Board of Governors Professor of American Studies and History at Rutgers University, my alma mater. Hey, what do we think we know about Lincoln, but isn't actually accurate?
Oh, it's such a tough question. I mean, there's lots of misconceptions. There's also lots of different opinions, right? I mean, you and I may feel he's a beloved figure, the greatest president ever. Not everybody necessarily believes that. So I think there's lots of misconceptions about Lincoln that are out there.
What made him a great leader?
Pardon me?
As a student of leadership, I'm always fascinated. What made Lincoln a great leader?
Well, I think a few different things. I mean, one is he understood very early on that education was the path to success. You know, think about his background, think about his life. What were the chances for this kid, an illiterate father, born in a dirt floor cabin? He even said in 1860 that his education was defective, but he was a believer in what we would call the American dream. And he understood that the path of upward mobility led through ideas, led through thinking, and his entire life exemplified that. I think that's one of the elements that made him a remarkable person and a great leader.
Professor, and by the way, you were featured in a documentary on Lincoln. Where did we see that documentary, Lou?
It was originally aired on CNN, and it's now actually available on HBO and HBO Max, I believe.
It's awesome. And by the way, Dr. Major is terrific in it. Lincoln's 100 Days, your book, first book to tell the full story of the period from September 1862 to January 1863. So the Emancipation Proclamation, people think they understand what it was. Free the slaves. First of all, that's not exactly true, because what Lincoln originally proposed in the Emancipation Proclamation and what the proclamation really was in the end, two totally different documents.
Absolutely fantastic that you bring that up, because again, here's one of those misconceptions. I mean, people fundamentally misunderstand the Emancipation Proclamation, and now we live in a moment where lots of people have moved away from the idea of Lincoln freeing the slaves. But here's the essence, I think, of Lincoln's greatness. We can watch him as he changed his mind over time. This is a man who in 1854 raised questions about the political and social equality of blacks. But he understands that times change. He thinks, that comes back to education, hard about the issues of the day. He decides to issue a preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, September 22nd, 1862, announcing in 100 days he's going to free the slaves. But here too, there's change over time, and that document evolves into an even more radical document, if you will, one that not only freed the slaves, but authorizes the enlistment of black soldiers. This was an astonishing idea. Only a few months earlier, Lincoln said, that's crazy. How can we enlist black soldiers? Black men could never fight, and if they did, it would lead to all kinds of depredations. No, no, no. He understood the significance of black men fighting for their own freedom and contributing to the Union cause.
By the way, the documentary I mentioned, thank you, team, for putting it up. It's called Lincoln Divided We Stand. Lincoln Divided We Stand. Check it out. Google it. It'll come up. Hey, Lou, I got to follow up on something. In the other literature I've read, again, as a student of leadership, check out our other program on the commercial side, Lessons in Leadership, I do with my terrific colleague, our executive producer and co-anchor, Mary Gamba. We talk about this all the time. Lincoln as a leader, it's complex in this sense. There are those who argue in other books that Lincoln's obsession was really not simply about freeing the slaves, but it was also about keeping the Union together, and that the Civil War and all the deaths connected to the Civil War, some argue, could have been avoided if Lincoln was not so committed to fighting the South on this and getting Southern states not to succeed or secede from the nation, but to keep the Union together. And it wasn't simply about slavery.
Yeah, this is an old argument, right? Going back earlier in the 20th century, the idea of a blundering generation, the idea that the war could have been avoided. But most historians will tell you we're not philosophers, and we don't deal with issues of inevitability. And there's all kinds of contingency related to the start of the war, related to the fighting of the war. At any given moment, things could have gone a different way. The important point is Lincoln understood that he was not going to allow this nation to be destroyed by secession, which he considered to be unconstitutional, an ingenious sophism, the essence of anarchy, he called it. And he was going to do whatever it took to try and preserve this nation, the last great hope of Earth, because it was the greatest experiment in democracy that had ever occurred. So there you have it. And to lay at his feet, I mean, look, he understood the toll and realized this as well, right? We live life forward, we understand it backwards. No one in April of 1861 thought the war was going to last 4 years and end up taking over 750,000 lives. But that is what happened. But in the end, the nation was preserved and slavery was abolished.
Talk about Lincoln's depression.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, here's another example of something that I think he overcame. Another example, I think, of his leadership. You know, he suffered from what was called melancholy in the 19th century. We might call it depression. They called it the hypos. He had the blues. He would get terribly sad, withdrawn. There were moments where his friends even thought he was suicidal. One could retreat and fall apart, or one can try and take the kinds of measures to help you get outside yourself. This is the other side of Lincoln. Lincoln, the storyteller, excuse me, Lincoln, the jokester. He had an incredible self-deprecating sense of humor. You know, the other thing about his depression and his melancholy, he was not an attractive man. And
he made fun of his appearance.
Yes, yes. And Walt Whitman saw him. He wrote a letter home to his mother in which he said, he's like a Hoosier Michelangelo, so awful ugly, he's nearly beautiful. Lincoln took that, he packaged it, he turned it into a set of skills, here too leadership skills, I think, Steve, by which people liked him. It's a great skill to have as a politician. You know, one example, famously, in the debate with Stephen Douglas, he said, the
Lincoln-Douglas debates, the many, many Lincoln-Douglas debates.
Yes, exactly. He says, my opponent accuses me of being two-faced. If I was two-faced, why would I be wearing the one that I have? I mean, it's just wonderful and it's brilliant. And he used storytelling to win over juries, and he used storytelling didactically as well.
I want to ask real quick, Mary Lincoln, a lot has been written and said about her, their relationship, and how complex she was. How did she influence Lincoln's presidency and him as a person?
It's such an important question. And Mary Todd Lincoln's reputation has changed over time, and in some ways has changed for the better. You know, Lincoln's secretaries couldn't stand her. They saw her as sort of, you know, a hellcat. She was demanding, she was loud, she was bossy. She stepped outside of the traditional role ascribed to women in the 19th century. And of course, later in life, Robert Todd Lincoln, for a variety of reasons, actually had her committed to an asylum. So her reputation over time had been as if she was a crazy person, and as if they had an awful marriage and an awful relationship. I think that view has been revised. It has been revised correctly. You can see some of it actually in the film Lincoln, Steven Spielberg's film, in which Sally Field plays Mary Todd Lincoln and plays her as a much more sympathetic character. I think Mary Todd was ambitious. She wanted her husband to be president. Most historians agree she helped him along this line of pushing him toward anti-slavery. And there's no question that they had a loving companionate marriage. They fought, but they loved each other.
Help us on this. In your new book is The Sum of Our Dreams, all right? First of all, what is the primary message in it? But then I want to come back to Lincoln and how divided our country was in the 1860s connected to the Civil War, and how divided we are going into 2022. Please, Lou.
The Sum of Our Dreams, the title comes from a speech that Barack Obama gave about the American dream, in which he said, America is the sum of our dreams. And I think that that is the tying theme of American history. What I try to do in that book is, in one volume, sort of tell these conflicting stories of American history, the ways in which American history has been redemptive, but let's face it, parts of it have also been reprehensible. James Baldwin spoke movingly about these dualities in American history. And so the book tries to tell that story. And there are many, many figures in American history who have embraced this idea that at essence, that's what this nation is about. You and I spoke previously about Bruce Springsteen. Springsteen famously said that all of his life's work has been measuring the distance between the American dream and American reality. Well, to take us back to Lincoln, Lincoln too, of course, is the great progenitor of this idea that anyone could rise, that this is what made America special, that you could shed burdens off of your shoulders. And if you worked hard and got an education, you could get ahead. It's one of the elements that led him to want to free the slaves, of course. I mean, because it's the exact opposite of the idea of free labor, of the sort of possibilities that are created in America. So I think that that's the story, the large story I try to tell from beginning to the present, of those kinds of battles over the meaning of the American dream.
Professor, let me complicate it for you, okay?
Sure, please do.
That's what I got from my my Rutgers education, right, in the School of Communication and Media Studies, to raise questions. Here's the question. January 6th, the insurrection at the Capitol. The red and the blue nature of our states, as if we're two different countries. Has there ever been a time in American history, as a historian, has there ever been a time where we've been this polarized, this divided, as if we are not the United States of America? That January 6th showed us an aspect, an ugly, horrible aspect of who we are, who some of us are, and how some, including former presidents, who don't even acknowledge that there was anything wrong with that, and call those people patriots and great Americans. Meaning, how divided are we, Lou?
Well, clearly we're very divided, and it's impossible to predict the future. You know, one of the things about the Civil War is the recognition that in many ways it's not over, right? Some of those issues that we may have thought were resolved by the Civil War were not resolved or open again, whether it's questions of race, questions of states' rights. I mean, that the legacy of the Civil War, the arguments over the meaning of the Civil War continue down to today. And this is part of that longer
Including
history.
with COVID, you don't tell me what to do. Literally, we are two nations. New Jersey is one, Alabama is another, meaning COVID rates are totally different. Responsiveness to mass, responsiveness or lack thereof to vaccines, totally different, based largely on geography, political ideology, and people's beliefs. I'm not saying we're about to have another civil war, but are we having a civil war without the Civil War?
Well, in some ways we are. For me, the issue, and it comes back to Lincoln, it comes back to politics, it comes back to our founding fathers. You know, you ask about other moments of extreme partisanship. My goodness, I mean, look at the battles between Jefferson and Hamilton. Look at the battles that were raged in the 1790s. Lincoln too, of course. I mean, the difference is this nation has seemed always to find a way to compromise, to make deals. Politicians have changed their minds. You know,
Today,
Jefferson,
Lou?
not today. And that's my point, Steve. My point is this, to me, is what the change is. So it's not that we haven't before had major crises that seem to put us on the brink. It's that at this moment, there is such a hardening of positions and such a refusal on the part of very reasonable people to sort of find room for compromise, that to me is what's most terrifying.
It is scary. It is scary. And again, my job is not to, I don't do commentary. I ask questions. We have discussions. But boy, when people excuse and somehow paint a different history of January 6th, when the Capitol and members of Congress and law enforcement professionals love the blue, really? When they're attacked in the name of it's my right to protest and storm the Capitol? Listen, I don't even know what the discussion's about, but go ahead, Lou, I'll get off my soapbox. Go ahead.
No, listen, these are important questions, and I want to bring it back. I'll bring it back to Lincoln. I'll bring it back to this discussion about leadership, about changing your mind, about admitting you're wrong. So let me just leave you with this. There's a moment in the war where Lincoln, who takes a hands-on, in the Civil War, thank you, where Lincoln takes a hands-on approach as commander-in-chief to thinking about military strategy. Grant is about to launch the assault on Vicksburg. Lincoln thinks Grant ought to go one way. Grant thinks he should go the other way. In the end, Grant goes ahead and does the attack the way in which he thought. And afterwards, Lincoln writes Grant a letter. And do you know what he says to him? He reviews their disagreement, and I'm going to read you the last line. He says, "I now wish to make the personal acknowledgement that you were right and I was wrong." Think about that. The President of the United States and the Commander-in-Chief writing to one of his generals saying, "You were right, I was wrong." That's what we need more of in America today.
Well said. That's leadership, by the way, not just sticking to your, quote, guns, regardless of the evidence, regardless of other perspectives. That's just stubbornness. Hey, Lou, thank you so much. Professor Louis Masur, who is a Board of Governors professor at American History, American Studies and History at Rutgers University. Thank you, Lou.
Thank you. Great seeing you again.
Great conversation. We'll be right back right after this.
State of Affairs with Steve Adubato is a production of the Caucus Educational Corporation. Funding has been provided by Valley Bank, PSC&G, Atlantic Health System, Summit Health, Prudential Financial, the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities Clean Energy Program, Johnson & Johnson, MD Advantage Insurance Company, and by NJ Best, New Jersey's 529 College Savings Plan. Promotional support provided by Insider NJ and by New Jersey Monthly.
Every day, nearly 2 million customers across New Jersey rely on PSC&G to provide natural gas. And every day, PSC&G is committed to doing it safely. That includes making sure you know what to do if you smell gas. A natural gas leak smells like rotten eggs. If you suspect a gas leak, leave your home immediately. Get far away, then call 911. Remember, smell, leave, call. Protect the ones you love. Learn more at pscg.com/gas safety.